Hi, everybody. Okay, so we're going to take a little bit of a detour for today for this video and talk about viral infections. We've been talking about fighting off pathogens, including viruses, but I want to take a little detour and talk about why viruses can infect our cells to begin with. Around the outside of our cells, we have cell membranes, right? And cell membranes are semi-permeable and are supposed to keep stuff out that we don't want in there, right? So why do cells ever let viruses in? They're supposed to keep that stuff out. And here's the reason. Our cells, remember I said our cells have proteins stuck on the outside of all of them? A lot of those are signals. They're like locks. And anytime anything wants to get into the cell, it's got to have the right key for those locks. They're called receptors. So for example, you have chemicals that travel all over your body called hormones. And those hormones want to get into cells. And so the cell is going to let the hormone in if the hormone fits inside the receptor. So you have outside these cells, these receptors, like a lock. And when the hormone comes, if it fits, like a key in a lock, it'll be allowed into the cell. And that's how the cell will let in things it has to let in. Well, viruses get into the cell because they mimic or copy things like hormones. They essentially pick the lock. So if you have this receptor outside your cell and it's supposed to let this hormone, right? When it attaches, the cell lets it in because it fits. If a virus manages to put a special protein on the outside in the same exact shape, when it comes up against the receptor, the cell will go, oh, it's a hormone, and let it in. And then the virus is in, and the virus will commandeer, take over the cell, make the cell use its own machinery to manufacture more of them. The viruses will build up, explode the cell, and they will all burst out and go and infect other cells. So viruses, in order to infect you, have to have the right keys. They have to be the right shape to fit in your receptor. That's really important. So viruses have special proteins. They have to have these particular proteins that are essentially the keys to get into the receptors. So if you take a look at this picture, here's our body cell. We have receptors. Maybe this is a receptor meant for a hormone. The virus has a protein that fits in there. If it can fit, then the virus will be allowed in, okay? And so there are a lot of viruses out there that can't be let into our cells. Just think how many times maybe you've gotten a cold and your dog or your cat hasn't caught it. That's because the virus that's infecting you, it's giving you the cold, it has the keys for your receptors, but it doesn't have the keys for the dog's receptors or the cat's receptors. There are lots of diseases that cats get. You can have a sick cat and nobody in the house is going to worry about catching the disease from that cat because they have different receptors, and the viruses that have picked the locks of cat cells haven't necessarily picked our locks. That is, the virus's proteins around the outside might fit the cat's receptors, but not ours. Now, there are times that a particular protein will fit both the cat's and ours. And there are some diseases that we can catch from cats and much fewer that we can catch from dogs. Okay, so as long as the virus has the right protein to get into the receptor, it will be allowed in. If it doesn't have that, it won't be allowed in. So some viruses infect humans because they have the right keys to get into human cells. Some viruses infect cats. Some viruses infect bats. Now we know very recently we had a perfect example of a virus that could only infect some animal, and we're not even sure which one, maybe a bat. And it had the exact right proteins to trick a bat body cell and get in. But something changed, and it was able to make new proteins on the outside that suddenly could fit human receptors. What am I talking about? COVID-19. COVID-19 was a virus that apparently could infect a wild animal, and its proteins were changed on the outside, at some point, one of those viruses picked up the ability to make a different shaped protein, and suddenly it became a virus that could infect humans. It was a novel virus. It was a new virus, and it was called zoonotic because it comes from animals. Zoo means animals. So this was a virus that infected animals, had the right proteins to fit the receptors of some wild animal, and it changed. It mutated in a way that allowed it to now infect humans, which then led to the entire pandemic that we have faced in COVID-19. Just to give you an overview of how this all works, you've got receptors on the outside of the cell. The virus has the little special proteins. They fit, they're able to get in. The virus releases its DNA or RNA, and the cell uses that, thinking it's its own DNA, to manufacture more virus parts, and more viruses build up and break out, and then you have many more of them, and they go on and they infect other cells. So again, the bottom line is viruses have special proteins that trick our receptors into letting them in through the cell membrane that otherwise would keep them out. And that's viral infections.